Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate you coming to be a part of our forum today. This is a forum that's a partnership with the NAACP and the City of Richmond on policing. And it's an opportunity really for people to have some conversation and some dialogue with members of our panel today on policing and the future of policing, where we are, how we got here, how we go forward. And so we're really glad to have you all be a part of this forum today. So we're going to get started in just a few moments. I think that all of our panelists should at this time be able to come on board, and you may share your screen now so you can see who our panelists are. Before we get started, my name is Michelle Milam. I'm Crime Prevention Manager with the Richmond Police Department, and my role is going to be as a moderator today here on this forum. So before we get started, I just wanted to first of all thank everyone for participating on this forum today. I know there were a lot of forums that took place today, and it's a very hot day, and we just really do appreciate you taking the time to get on board and with this forum to get some of the questions that I know that people have answered. Also wanted to make sure that people kind of understand a little bit about the flow of today. So it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have some welcome and introductions by Mr. Robinson from the NAACP, and then we will also have an overview by Chief French, followed by a panel that will be able to be available to answer questions from Richmond PD. And the panelists will include Chief French, Captain Tim Simmons, Sergeant Eric Oliver, and Officer Andrea President. And then as well, we will have some questions that are going to be posed by community members. There's 5 community members who have questions that they're going to be able to ask. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If there is some kind of technical difficulty, if you're having trouble, you might want to try to log back off and log back on. If we do have trouble, trying to reach some of our participants, we'll just move on to the next person and try to bring that person back in so that we can get those questions answered. The other thing is that this is the beginning of a dialogue. So it by no means is the end of the conversation. So if your particular question didn't get answered, there's a couple ways that you can do that. There is a question and answer feature that's on Zoom. And so you can type that into the Q&A box if you're joining us via Zoom. If you're watching us via YouTube, this will be broadcast again, and you're free to send some of your questions. And again, so that as we continue to do these kinds of forums, you can participate that way. And also, just for those who are here to ask questions, we'll have an opportunity for you to come on. We'll bring you on to ask the question. We have a limited period of time, so we may have to stop a line of questioning if it's going on a little bit longer, just so that we can get everybody's questions answered. So we really appreciate that. And with that, I'm actually going to be able to turn this over first to Mr. Willie Robinson from the NAACP to kind of give us an overview and to share with us today the thoughts for this particular forum.
Thank you, Ms. Milam. I welcome all who have joined us. This is an opportunity that the NAACP Richmond branch is looking to become more visible and provide more platforms for various community discussions. I was led to this by just being aware, as you are, of some of the things that's happening around law enforcement and how that's going to look for the future. Should be looking for the future. I had the opportunity to share, listen to, and hear from the council and also the police department. So the thought was to first of all have the opportunity to hear what our police department is doing under the direction of our new chief, and for you to hear directly and to raise questions and opportunities for, as been explained, to further this conversation will be coming. I'm sure there'll be others who will be doing it, but we intend to stay in front of it and most certainly encourage the broader participation from various sectors of the community. And as we go forth, the idea would be for us to become better informed and have input in terms of what's happening in our communities from the standpoint of law enforcement and what that's going to look like in the future. With that being said, then much of what Ms. Malum has said is basically there are established ground rules, and we would hope that everyone would want to abide by them. And the questions you would have, I promise someone that if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, we'll make sure that some kind of an answer gets to the question that you asked, and they can be made available to you. Thank you, Ms. Malum.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robinson. And now we're going to have some remarks from our chief to kind of frame the issue as we kind of look at these issues of law enforcement, justice, civil rights, where we go from here. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief French.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I won't say much because I know we want to get to the questions, but I just want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank everybody for participating. This came out of a conversation that Mr. Robinson and I had a few weeks ago about putting on this forum so that people can be more informed about the police department. The panelists here, besides myself, Captain Simmons, Officer Oliver, and Officer President are also available to answer questions, because I think the more people are informed, the better decisions that we can make as a community and a police department as a whole to move forward. So I look forward to this engaging conversation.
Thank you, Chief. And you mentioned briefly, did you want to introduce the other panelists?
I'm sorry. So we have Captain Simmons. We have Detective Sergeant Oliver. And then we also have Officer President, who worked last night and is probably working tonight. So, but she still looks as beautiful as ever with no sleep.
Thank you. So this has come to the part of our program that we really want to have the dialogue. This is more about dialogue and discussion. And it's, again, something that has to be ongoing. It's not something that we can just do once. We have to continue to have these discussions. And because of pandemic, we're trying to figure out ways to do that. So we're doing this virtually. So I have a list of several different folks who are going to ask questions who are part of the NAACP and who are going to present some questions to the panel. And feel free, more than one person from the panel can answer these questions. So the folks who I have in the queue is from the senior perspective, Ms. Myrtle Braxton; from a youth perspective, from Bright Futures, Rena Taylor; from a religious perspective, Reverend Keith Williams; from a neighborhood council perspective, Linda Whitmore; and from West Contra Costa Unified School District, Othari Quishton. So what I would like to do is first go with Miss Myrtle Braxton. So we're going to take a moment and bring her up, and then she is going to pose her question to the panel.
Thank you. Okay. My first question that I have is about training. Does the Richmond Police Department officers receive training in race relations and how to interact with people who are mentally challenged?
I'm going to let Captain Simmons answer this question.
Good afternoon, everybody. So the direct answer to that question, Myrtle, is yes. The Richmond Police Department does receive regular training in race relations and dealing with folks with mental illness. They receive this training in multiple different ways. The first wave of that training comes while the officer's actually in the police academy. There's a whole learning domain that is centered around dealing with folks with different backgrounds, different races, different nationalities, socioeconomic issues. So they get that training first off in the academy, and then they get it while they're in the training program at the police department itself. And then the state actually requires every 2 years that there's a minimum of a 4-hour concentrated block of instruction on those issues every other year that officers have to continue to have on an ongoing basis. And then specifically with the mental illness side of the training, we actually have a detective that's assigned to a mental health evaluation team, and they work with clinicians on a regular basis. So what that does for us is that allows for those mental health professionals to come in and do what we call lineup training. So they have an opportunity to engage with our patrol officers more specifically in a lineup atmosphere before they go into service on the street, to do 15, 20-minute touch-based training, but they can do it on a regular basis, and they can do it on an as-needed basis. So we have that resource available for training for patrol officers as well, specific to the mental illness.
Thank you for that, Captain Simmons. Did anybody else have anything else to add from other perspectives on the panel?
I'll also add that we're looking at doing additional training. I think what we haven't done well or we can do better is integrating our new officers with our community. And I think that there are a lot of things specific to the city of Richmond that we can be integrating them with. You know, a lot of people in our community still talk about the Richmond Cowboys. And so knowing that people talk about the Richmond Cowboys means that it's still prevalent in our community that this has happened between the police department and the community. There was some harm done, and we need to be teaching that to our officers, because when I came on, I didn't know what the Richmond Cowboys were. And then it was explained to me and I had to learn. And then I, you know, watched the 60 Minutes clip. And if people don't know what I'm talking about, there was a big 60 Minutes clip. There was a big lawsuit between what people characterize as the Richmond Cowboys, who were a group of white officers who had harm, were known for doing harm to people of color in our community. And there was a big lawsuit, a big payout by the police department. And so even though that was many years ago, back in the, I believe, 70s, maybe early 80s, and we're in 2020, there are still people that are harmed in our community that still talk about that. And so I think that we need as a department to talk about that, because when you feel or you hear the anger from the community as to, you know, the relationship, and the people that are working now are like, what are you talking about? You know, we try to do a really good job, but it's that harm that has been done over time that we still need to reconcile with and have really some discussion with the community about. So that's what I'm going to be looking forward to moving forward, is to talk about some of those things and how we can recognize, acknowledge, and how we as a community can move forward.
Thank you, Chief. I think that acknowledgement of historical trauma is one that many people are dealing with and you know, when you experience that with people, the last trauma that they have is the way that they're going to interpret the current situation. So I think that that's a really good point. So at this point in time, I want to move on because we have a question from our youth panelist, Raina Taylor. So I'm going to bring up Raina so that she can ask her question.
Hello. So my question is that in my experience with like on-site officers at the schools, I found that they weren't very helpful with certain situations because they didn't fully understand students. So I was wondering if in the future there would be some sort of program or way for these officers to learn more about the students that they're placed with and working with, so that when situations do come up, they can fully provide a helpful solution.
Thank you. And we know there's been some changes recently with the school resource program not being in the schools anymore. Does anybody on the panel want to speak to that?
All right, I'll take that one then. We actually have had, I don't have an SRO on the panel. Maybe next time we can make sure that happens. But our SROs actually do extensive training in how to interact with young people. So when they become school resource officers, they go to a specific training just for that. And then we've also done other trainings like policing the teenage brain, because we know that that's different. And so we've tried to put our school resource officers through as much training as possible, but I don't think anything ever prepares us for everything that we're going to deal with. And so we're always looking for learning opportunities and reviewing cases to see how we could do things better. And so that's where your input really is helpful, is if there was a specific situation that you could bring to our attention, and whether you want to make a complaint or you just want to talk about it and express, you know, how you think things could be done differently. We're always open and willing to have those conversations. And I think Mr. Christian has some additional questions about SROs later, so I'll reserve any other further comments. I think the other officers have remarks.
Yes, did anybody else on the panel have remarks about school resource officers or relationships with young people in general?
I'd like to say something. Another thing, another training that's the SRO has received is implicit bias training. Most SROs go through a 40-hour implicit bias training, and usually the SROs it's usually someone that has a passion for kids and youth, and that's the sole purpose that they volunteer. It's actually a process to be selected for SRO because we try to pick someone that has an interest in what they're doing, because you tend to have more of a passion for it when you have an interest in it.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to have an opportunity. Any other panelists want to talk about that and about, what, Chief, you talked a little bit about what do you do if we ever do have an issue in the community? We have to be real about this. If something comes up, what is the best way for us to address that with our young people? What are some of the vehicles that we can utilize, knowing that people feel apprehensive sometimes about talking to law enforcement about these kinds of things?
So I think Officer President wanted to comment about that too, but to go to your question, Michelle, there are several ways that you could get into us. We all have email addresses, including myself, so I receive emails daily, and if there's a certain situation that somebody wants to discuss with me, I'm open to that. Additionally, we have a way to actually make a formal complaint, and that's through our Office of Professional Accountability. And we have that information on our website. You could download a complaint form and make a complaint that way. Additionally, away from the police department, because we do know that there are people that don't have trust in the police department, and we are working on that. But there is the Community Police Review Commission in which you can make a complaint, and they're commissioned by the City Council, and they are housed at City Hall, and they also take complaints.
Thank you, Chief. And Officer President, you had one more remark about this as well.
Yes. Hey, Ms. Taylor. I actually aspire to be an SRO. My background is working with youth. I teach kids how to play music, specifically guitar. But I did have a question as far as what is it that you're looking for the officer to learn more about? I know for myself personally, how I interact with the youth that I'm working with or teaching, they get to know me on a personal level, and I get to know them on a personal level. So we can have a connection, something that we can talk about, and it's not just, oh, I'm in this uniform, or I'm just, your teacher. I'm supposed to be there as a mentor, to guide and educate. And so I just wanted to ask you specifically, what is it that you would like for that officer to learn about either yourself or from your peers? Like, what is it that you guys are looking for?
So you mentioned how your personal interactions with students is getting to know them on a personal basis, and I think that's what many of us from my school personally are looking for, because we did have some officers that we really were we preferred them over teachers. And it's because we had a personal understanding, and they understood, someone with mental illnesses or someone who is disabled physically. And I think that's more what I'm looking for, someone who you aren't just there as an officer, but you're there as a person to talk to.
Right. Okay. Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's some good dialogue, and that's definitely somewhere we need to kind of delve in deeper. We're going to move on to the next question because we have more questions. And the next question comes from Reverend Keith Williams. So Reverend Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michelle. And I want to just first express my thanks to Chief French and to all the officers here on this panel for taking out your time to speak with us today. As one of the pastors in the greater Richmond area, and my church in particular started in North Richmond itself, I think one of the things that many of the clergy that I've spoken with in the Richmond area would like to see is some type of partnership between clergy and police that can be formed so that the churches are aware of, first, the officers that are policing our area, And second, to be aware of any issues or concerns that may be taking place in and around our particular areas or within our churches. Is that something that your department would be amenable to kind of create or to form some type of partnership like in that respect?
That's a great question. Any of the panelists, partnerships, would like to speak to that?
Good afternoon, Pastor. I'll take a stab at that real fast. It's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to speak with you. And I want to first say the role that clergy play in society is absolutely huge, right? If we want real change, if we want true change, we have to recognize, number one, that it has to happen from the inside out. And your message and the message of the churches in the community deal with issues of the heart, issues of the soul. And I think that as a police department, we understand, and there's a lot of talk about change is only temporary if we don't deal with who people are on the inside and what the root of the problems are and what the root of the issues are. And as it relates to partnership, these kinds of deep conversations need to happen. I think at least start on a one-on-one basis. Me sitting down with you sitting down with the officer that patrols your particular area, and getting to know each other from a standpoint of being able to build that level of trust. Because if you're going to get people to open up, if you're going to get people to change from the inside out, they have to be able to trust us. They have to be able to trust the church. They have to be able to trust the process. And so I'll for one say, yeah, we're absolutely open to those kind of partnerships, not just open to them, but I think we need them. The connection that we have with the faith-based community is a must. Without it, all we're doing is dealing with surface level issues. And we need your teamwork so that we can help see people change and deal with the issues from the inside out. So I, for one, and I know that the chief would also embrace those kinds of relationships. I won't speak for her, but I have heard her express those desires and the vision that she has for that kind of connection. So the short answer, I would say, is yes.
Yeah, and I want to open up to the rest of the panel, because I think that it's a really important partnership to have with the faith community, and it's not something that Richmond PD is a stranger to with our chaplaincy program and other programs we've done. Would anybody on the panel, or perhaps the chief, like to speak about some of our existing partnerships and where we could expand?
Officer President had her hand up, so I'm going to let her go first, and then I'll speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just speaking from my own personal experience, I work in what's called Beat 7 in the Northern District, which is a pretty big beat. You have west of 23rd Street all the way past, east of 23rd Street all the way past San Pablo Ave, and north of Richmond High, and a little bit south of McDonald Boulevard. And so I have several churches in my beat, also right next to chicken joints. So you get prayed on and eat some chicken. But I know I've encountered many pastors. I've actually gone into churches when I worked day shift, and I've gone into service. I've actually sung with some church members, been prayed for, even on just different details, and find out that, a person belongs to a certain church, and they say, hey, can I pray for you? And I'm like, of course. And so I definitely think that each officer, once they get to know their beat and start getting outside the patrol car, making these interactions, we do that. I know I'm speaking personally for myself. I definitely get out and talk to the church, and because I grew up in the church, and so being in the uniform, I'm still Andrea. I'm still connected to God, because through God everything is possible. And so there is definitely interactions with officers on patrol.
Thank you for that. And anybody else who would like to answer? I'm sorry, I can't see everybody's hands up, so feel free to just jump right in. Did anybody else want to take that on, or are we good with that one?
So I'll just add, Michelle mentioned we do have a chaplaincy program, and so our chaplains meet regularly. Although with COVID, I'm not sure how regular that is now. But other than that, we've had different meetings time after time, year after year with pastors that will get together and ask the chief or the command staff to come. And we've had good conversation, but that never seems to carry on long term, like regularly. And I do think that there is room for that. There's a great opportunity for us to have some good dialogue. You know, with this whole defunding and police need to change and all of the conversations that we're having some good conversations, but these, Captain Simmons talked about one-on-one conversations or, you know, small group conversations. And I think that's where we could really air stuff out and get to the bottom line and figure out how to move forward. I think all of these things help. And so we are more than open and willing to sit down with any of the pastors in our city to figure out how we can move forward.
Okay, well, we'd love to get in contact with some folks in your office and actually make a forum like that happen to where you can maybe sit down with many of us Richmond clergy so that we can actually discuss further. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Williams, and thank you to everyone who answered that question. And just to make people aware, I do see some of the questions coming up in the Q&A, which are great, and some questions posed about how we come up with reconciliation and accountability forums and being able to connect. So I think this has struck a chord and people are interested in this. So this will be something that we can consider moving forward with. So we're going to go on to our next question. Our next question comes from Linda Whitmore, who is going to talk about a question pertaining to her perspective as a neighborhood council member.
Okay, good afternoon. And thank you for allowing me to do this. And I want to thank our president of the NAACP, Willie Robinson, for helping put this together. It's really impressive. Thank you. I contacted two of our presidents for a question. And the first one that I can do right now is from the Santa Fe Neighborhood Council, and the president is Vernon Whitmore. Yep, my husband. Anyway, the question: how would defunding of the Richmond Police Department affect community policing in Richmond when we already have a reduced police force?
And that question can be answered by anyone on the panel.
All right,
I'll start it off. Well, the funding, we're already short-staffed, so we're already facing challenges without losing any more resources. At one point, we had video camera people that retired officers that would sit in a video room, and when we had a shot spotter activation or a crime that occurred in a certain area, we had people that could bring up video and give real-time information to responding officers. And now we just don't have that capability anymore. And officers work long hours and face serious challenges. So I don't think losing more officers or more resources would help. So defunding would definitely be a negative thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as Sergeant Oliver talked about, we've already lost a lot of positions. Just in this last budget cycle, we lost 34 positions within the police department. And that is significant when you think about going from 200 police officers down to 150, which is what we have right now. And probably about 15 of those are off on injury leave, long-term leave. So with the very minimum amount of officers that we have right now, we're only able to do the bare minimum. I mean, we're trying to keep up with everything that we've done over the years, but it's very difficult, and we just can't with the number of staff that we have. So at this point, we're talking to a lot of neighborhood councils and the community to see, okay, what is it that the community actually expects of us? Because we need to be able to take this information and go to council and say, with what the community expects of us, this is what we need. And that's what I would like to do. And I think we'll have the opportunity to do. But with this whole defunding movement, there are people that still want to defund the police department. And my answer is we've already been defunded. We've been defunded for the last 5 years to get to where we are now. And while I also believe that a lot of the resource organizations, the social service organizations that the community is calling for to be funded, I also agree that those resources need to be funded because that's also going to help us out It's just that I don't believe that the money should come from the police department because we simply don't have it. Now, this is going to impact, Ms. Whitmore, I know that you're a resident and part of the neighborhood council. This is going to affect how we do policing. As Sergeant Oliver mentioned, we already don't have a CCTV program. So when things happen, we're just relying on the officers to respond when they can respond, as opposed to when we had CCTV monitoring, at least there was somebody there to go to the cameras and figure out where this was occurring and see if they could gather additional information for the officers that were responding. Additionally, a lot of crimes can't be followed up on. We have a very short investigation staff. So, and Sergeant Oliver can also talk to this. He works as the property sergeant. We get tons of property crimes. Somebody broke into my house, somebody broke into my car, somebody stole my identity. And many of those things, of course, when those things happen, we feel victimized. However, we do not have the staff to actually investigate these cases. If we have the staff, even with minimal information, we can investigate and try to figure out who's responsible. But as of right now, we only have enough staff to really look at the cases that have some, significant lead that we can follow. We can't put a lot of time and effort into these cases because we just don't have the staffing to do so. We have 4 homicide detectives, and we've had 10 homicides this year so far. So, and 5 of those were within the last month. Not only does our homicide detectives investigate homicides, they also investigate shootings, and we've had a significant number of those over the summer. So as you can imagine, when your loved one died 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and the case hasn't been solved, we have very little time to go back and explore those cases to see if there's anything that we can develop to solving those cases that happened years and years ago. And so I know a lot of families are frustrated because if it was my loved one, I would want somebody to be looking at that case periodically. And as of this point, we just don't have the staffing to do so. People that are supposed to register for being, help me out, sex registrants. So you get out of prison, you're a sex registrant, you're supposed to register, you come down to the police department. Yes, we have somebody to register you, but we're also supposed to go out and check those residents to make sure that they're complying with their terms of probation or parole. And we just don't have the staff to do that. And so there's a ton of examples just like that, when we talk about more defunding, that less and less is going to get done. We get constant complaints about speeding and, accidents and traffic issues, and we just don't have the staffing to address all of the complaints we receive.
Wow.
Thank you, Chief.
Can I just add something really quick, Michelle? So to speak to what the Chief was just saying, Linda, and what Sergeant Oliver was saying, the other part of community policing is it's also a strategy and a philosophy. And I want to assure you and all the residents in Richmond that though we're having challenges with the implementation side of things, which requires the staffing and the tools and the resources, the philosophy and the strategy to be a community police officer is still something we hold very dear, and we want our patrol officers being community minded, and I will say they are community minded. We want our detectives being community minded, and they are community minded, and all the way up to the chief pushes that on a regular basis. It starts with her and it filters its way all the way down. But yeah, the implementation side of it that requires the resources to really execute that in the manner in which we would like to, we struggle with that.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I appreciate the answer. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and it's a very pressing issue, obviously, that we're trying to figure out. Because obviously we're dealing with communities that have been historically underfunded, and the question of how do you balance that, and how are you able to right size the police department so that we can still provide the level of service that the community wants and needs, while at the same time investing in resources that have been historically underfunded for many, many years. And I think we're all trying to grapple with that right now. So thank you all for responding to that.
Right. Thank you.
So our last question in the queue for this is about educational component. And Othari Christian, you're up next. It is your time to ask the question.
All right. The question that I have, since the police are out of the school now, what would be the response time for an officer to respond to an issue an issue that has occurred at a particular school?
So I'll start with that one. This is very concerning to me, and I know that there's varying opinions on whether officers should be in schools or not. But to answer your question, it depends. I can't give you what the actual response time will be. It will depend on what else is occurring in the city of Richmond at the time. We prioritize our calls, so depending on what the priority the call is, will depend on when we respond. This is concerning because, you know, that when school resource officers are on campus, they're building, I know contrary to what some people believe, they're building relationships with the young people so that they can problem solve and they could take their time to problem solve. Now with officers responding from their beats, there's not going to be that relationship that they had before. So, part of resolving some problems is that you have some already built-in trust and you have a relationship, and that's how we are able to really resolve a lot of problems before they become police issues on campuses. We're able to lower the amount of juveniles that we had in the juvenile justice system because of those relationships. We're able to contact parents and have sit downs and really spend the time and effort that needed to resolve situations before they became criminal issues. And we're just not going to have that anymore. We are, I should end with, we are looking at some alternative, what else we can do to kind of maintain some of those relationships. I have not heard from the school district at all about this issue, so I don't even know what the expectation is. But what I'm hoping is that the school resource officers that we had from last year, that we will still be able to utilize them in some way and maybe even have a presence, even though we don't have a contract with the school, so that young people still have somebody that they could go to when they need an officer.
Thank you. Were there any more responses from the panel around that? Okay. Well, that's definitely, a big question about how do we do this, and how do you continue to maintain relationships so that there is that relationship built, even though there aren't necessarily officers in the school, how that occurs. So that's obviously something that we'll be having to work together as a community to figure out, what the community wants and how do we balance that? How do we do that? So we finished our first round of questions. So we're going back to our second round. So Ms. Braxton, you get to ask your second question.
Okay. I think the chief has already answered my question, but I'll ask it anyway. This is a real concern. Other people have talked to me about this, and that's now that people know that police officers that there's no traffic, police officers, and that there are no officers around, they don't even try to stop for the red lights. They don't just run the yellow. They don't stop for the red lights. They don't stop for stop signs. And this is very dangerous because somebody's going to be killed. And I just wonder, what kind of balance can we make? I know in one neighborhood, they actually sent somebody out to that particular neighborhood, but then that's not equality either. So I just wonder, what kind of balance can we make so that people, even if we in some cities, they used to put a phony car out there, an old police car, so people would think there was a police officer around, but we've got to do something because they're actually getting worse.
So we actually do still have a traffic unit. It's not, staffed the way I would like to have it staffed. And actually we've done a lot of good work our traffic unit has and received grants for funding. So we're doing a lot of traffic stuff on overtime, which is covered by the grant, which helps us. And so we've been doing a lot of DUI checkpoints. We're doing some just overall safety, having officers go out and focus on traffic safety. So we are still enforcing traffic, but it is still a major concern that I receive from multiple neighborhood council meetings. There's just a lot of traffic issues that we're trying to address and just don't have all the resources to always address them. The beat officers are addressing them when they can. But there's also, on the other side, part of this whole defunding push, and I know there's been conversation in other cities, is to not have police officers enforce traffic at all. And I think that that will be very detrimental to our city. We have a ton of traffic collisions. We have a lot of DUIs here in our city. And, but I know that that is also a discussion that some groups, even within our city, is having.
Thank you. Did anybody else on the panel have any response about that? Okay, well then we will go on to the next question. And just so you know, I am looking at some of the Q&A, in between questions. And so a lot of good questions are coming up. I just want to invite the panelists, if you'd like to go into the Q&A and be able to respond to the questions. We have our wonderful crime prevention specialist who's in there answering questions. And if we don't get your question answered, we're going to try to get that answered for you as well. But feel free to jump in there and connect with people. There's a lot of great conversation that's happening in the Q&A. And so I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge that. So we're going to go back again to Raina. The floor is yours.
My second question was regarding, so at my school in particular, we have the Law Academy and classes that are based around different law aspects. And so my question was, would there be programs that the police officers could participate in or put on for students to get a better understanding of their reasoning for being at the school and what they do in general?
Yeah. Let's pose that to the panelists. And I don't know if Officer President or anyone else would like to respond to that one.
I'll start.
Go ahead, Chief. Go right ahead.
I'll start because we were actually planning to have, so over the last few years, we've done community safety academies where we invite people to our department and they take an 8-week course. They come in 2 times a week to learn about the police department, learn what we do in every aspect, the detective bureau, everything. And we put you through 4 simulations and give you training similar to what we receive. And we were actually planning to do one for young people this summer, but due to COVID, we weren't able to do that because it's really hands-on. So we really want to do that once we're able to get over this pandemic and have people back in the department. Additionally, we have our cadet program, which is for young people that are just getting out of high school and that are in college. And it's another opportunity to learn about the police department, but you're actually working and you're getting paid. And then we also have our Explorer program for those of you that are still in high school, where you also learn about police tactics, and we have you participate in a lot of activities around the police department. So those are different opportunities that we have in place right now.
And I know there were some other responses as well. I want to make sure everybody had a chance to get in.
So I was going to say that something else that we do, we try to find different ways to make positive contacts, whether it's shop with a cop or cops and goblins. We try to find no stress situations to where officers can interact with the youth. Because a lot of times when we're on scenes, when we're on a crime scene, or we're actually doing our duties, we might be a little short or off-putting with our responses to things, because it's a high stress situation most of the time. So we always come up with positive ways to make those contacts. Well, we try to.
Thank you. If there wasn't any more response to Raina's question, we're going to go back again to Reverend Williams.
Thank you. A portion of my second question was kind of answered. I do want to rephrase it a little bit. As a parent of a Black male son, one of the tough questions or tough conversations I had to have with my son was to educate him on what to do and not to do when being stopped by a police officer. One of the things that it seems or has seemed as is that the Black person or the Black male has been seen as or perceived as a greater threat than some of our counterparts. And so my concern is, what can your department do to help ease the concern that some of us parents have in making sure that our kids get home safely? If it's for regular traffic stops, that they'll make it home safely. You know, what kind of message can come from your department that kind of helps us understand that our child for a regular stop will make it home at night versus ending up in a body bag?
You could go upstairs.
Well, I'll start with that one unless you wanted to go first, Chief. Okay.
Sorry, I was talking to my kid.
So honestly, I have a 23-year-old son, and he goes to Chico. One day he was stopped twice in 20 minutes. So I share your concerns. And as a father of a Black son myself, there's nothing I can tell you to ease your stress levels, because I feel the same stress that you feel. But I can tell you that our department, one thing that we have a good track record for is training. We have a lot of training, and when you're well trained and you're put in stressful situations, you make good decisions because you've trained for it. So one thing that we do, like I said before, we train. We stop a lot of cars with guns in them that end with no one getting shot, because for the most part, our officers show a lot of poise. They show a lot of confidence because they're well trained. So honestly, I don't think there's anything that anyone on this panel can tell you to make you sleep better at night, because I can tell you when the phone rings at 12 at night and I don't know where my son is, I'm scared every time I answer the phone. So I share your fears and I understand.
Pastor, I'll just add also to reiterate something that Sergeant Oliver just said with the training. There's also specific training that we work on. It's called our force options training. But with that, we focus on identifying threats and training the officers to really hone in on what might be a threat, not necessarily the person, but what are the actions of the individual, what are the potential weapons that they see, what's going on around them, all of those types of things. So we reinforce the type of training is actually legitimate, the type of threats that are actually legitimate. And then the other side of this is the chief has talked a lot about wanting to do training with officers at the point when we hire them, where there's cultural competency training specific to Richmond, meaning talking with these folks, getting them ingrained into what the culture of Richmond is so that they understand the community in which they're going to be policing. You know, to go back to a definition of community that's actually found in the dictionary, you know, one of the definitions in Merriam-Webster's dictionary is a group of like-minded people. Well, that definition of community has nothing to do with anything else other than understanding the mindset of the community, becoming like-minded with them, integrating with them. And so looking at that from the standpoint of when we hire somebody, a brand new officer, actually intentionally integrating them with the community, connecting them with the community at the very, very onset, at the very, very beginning, so that they understand what it is that the chief, all the way on down to the patrol sergeant and their peers for that matter, what everybody expects of them, what the community expects of them. So that's another initiative that's starting right now at the point of hire that I think is going to be a very fruitful process for us. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important question, you know, the question about having the talk that, you know, if you are coming from a background where you're African-American or even other communities where you sit down and have a talk. And, you know, one of the things that we have done in the department is we've partnered, you know, with district attorneys and public defenders to do the whole piece around, you know, what happens when you're stopped. And there's no way you can predict how it would happen in each specific incident. But I think that that's something that we have been focusing on as a community for a while. And it's important to continue to have those conversations and build those relationships. And so that's very fruitful dialogue. Thank you all for contributing to that. I don't know if anybody else wanted to contribute before we move on to the next question.
I just had one thing that I wanted to add. I always tell people when they ask, well, what can I tell my son, my daughter, whoever? And I always say, comply now, complain later. You can always, if you have a problem with what's happening, I just ask that you comply, because that way that things don't escalate, and you can always complain later. And, you know, our officers wear body cameras, we can review footage. But if you comply with what the officer's asking you to do, I know you're going to be safe. And then we could deal with the complaint portion of it later.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an important question, because there's an accountability piece that's there for all of us on that.
Officer Preston did have something she wanted to say.
Also, go ahead.
I'll try to keep it quick. Interesting enough, a parent actually reached out to myself, my fiance. She's also in law enforcement. She's a deputy with Contra Costa County. The parent was saying that her children have nightmares because they feel they are of color, and they felt that a police officer would come in to harm them. And that's what police are. That's what they are, to actively harm them because of their skin color. And so we actually met up at a park, and we sat down, and talking from our perspective as being of color and also in law enforcement, we told them that when a traffic stop happens, we're not saying, oh, I'm stopping this car because a Black person is driving it. We're stopping because we noticed an infraction or a crime was committed. And so we're contacting that vehicle and that person in that vehicle to address that. And we're there to talk to that person. We're not there to harm that person. And of course, there are sometimes situations unfold, but we have great training to handle those situations. Like Captain Simmons says, we have the wheel that we go through and to address the type of a threat that could happen. But we were explaining to them that we don't put this uniform on to harm somebody because of their skin color. We are there to address that if a crime has been committed, to arrest them, and they go through due process, and they'll go to jail. You know, our goal is not to harm people. We are here to protect and safeguard lives and property. And so that, just in a nutshell, we had that kind of conversation. And I definitely think that is something that should happen more often, especially with the younger community, and that part of our job is to enforce, but also educate. And so I think if we lean more on I'll bring up the education side of it, it'll be the unknown, will start to fade away. And so that's my little 2 cents.
Thank you. We're going to move on to, because we're doing good on time, our next question. Linda Whitmore, you have a second question. The floor is yours.
Okay, this question's from Joe Fisher, who's the president of Coronado Neighborhood Council. And his question, what are you doing to maintain the peace in our community, and at the same time keep the more aggressive officers in check, working on all of the officers and the community?
Well, I think the first thing we do, like Captain Simmons said, we identify the type of officer we want in the application process. We have a lot of qualified candidates, but we go past just the basic qualifications. We want someone that embodies the chief's vision for the department and the community. So that's what we do in the very beginning. And then the second thing we do, we have something called a blue team process. And it's anytime you're in any type of any force, anytime you use any type of force, it triggers what we call a blue team. And the sergeant's job is to review any video from incidents that result in force. And we go to the scene and speak to people after actually during the incident. So so basically we try to identify the issues. And if you're an officer that's had a number of blue teams, then a lot of times the incidents that you're involved in are scrutinized a little more.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to speak to that question? Use of force or anything around that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to our last question, which is from Otari Christian. Have a second question.
Yes. Second question, I have a first part and a second part, but the first part of it is, how can the school, CSOs and the police work together to better serve the students at the school?
So I'll throw that question out to anyone on the panel who wants to talk about the relationship, knowing that, you know, we have a different relationship obviously now with the school district than we had before. How would they work together?
Mr. Christian, I'll take a stab at that. I'll start with saying that anytime you want to improve service and you're dealing with another entity like the CSOs, I mean, you got to have relationship, right? I mean, the beat officers or the folks that are patrolling that area, there needs to be a bridge and a connection between the CSOs and either the beat officers or the SROs or whatever entity we might have out there working with the schools. And I think that sometimes we put expectations before we build relationship, and then we get frustrated with the results. And we have to start with first things first, and that's making sure that there are good, solid relationships built between CSOs and SROs or police officers, school administration and police officers, and that everybody's on the same page and at least their goals are aligned, so that when we go about doing the job to provide service, which really we want to provide service to the youth, the kids, we're all kind of moving in the same direction. And so I would just start with that, saying, let's make sure we have really good relationship and that it's aligned, our goals and our objectives are aligned, so that we don't get disappointed with our results, so that we're not after different things.
Thank you. Anybody else wanted to respond to that question?
Yeah, I'll say something to that. How are you doing, O3, first of all? Talked to you earlier this week.
Yes.
I think most officers and even myself, sergeants, we build relationships within our beat anyway. Like that's something that we all do. 9 times out of 10, like I'll exchange numbers, phone numbers, and people will call me about quality of life issues even that they're having, or any information they have when a crime is committed. So just to piggyback off of what Captain Simmons said, it is about relationships. And I think it's something that we already do. So just more of the same, basically. Like we're good at building relationships, and that's where it all starts.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to take a stab at that, or got some good responses? Want to make sure that I didn't leave anybody out?
Michelle, can I make a quick comment back to just Ms. Whitmore's question? Mm-hmm. I did want everybody who's listening and Ms. Whitmore to know that we do have back to her use of force question about how we keep aggressive officers in check, or whatever the case might be. Another important component to our use of force review at the police department that I don't think most community members are aware of is every instance of force where force is used and one of those blue teams are filled out, like what Sergeant Oliver referenced. They're all looked at and scrutinized by a use of force review board. So that consists of all 3 captains that are in the police department, investigators from our Office of Professional Accountability, attorneys are sitting on that panel, RPOA union representatives are sitting on that panel. I mean, there is a team of people that are use of force experts, department experts in use of force are sitting on that panel. So every single month, we look at the body cam footage, we read the police reports, and those instances are scrutinized up, down, left, and right. And if there are any problems that we see with anything in comparison to our policy and community expectations, or law for that matter, Chief French is made aware of those immediately, and then there's a decision made by the chief at that point whether those need to be looked into in a more formal investigation or something else needs to occur. But we identify training needs in that panel. So officers that maybe might be viewed as more aggressive, perhaps they just need more training. They're not trained properly, because this type of training skill is actually a perishable skill. So maybe they have some areas that need to get addressed. I just want everyone to know that there really is a comprehensive 360 approach that the department has to looking at those instances, and I didn't want that to get left out.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that, and so thank you for letting me, saying that. I appreciate it.
Well,
Thank you. And I think that's one of the value of having these kind of conversations is that there's a lot of stuff that, that may not be known. And there's a lot of conversations that need to be had, from both sides perspective, things that the department does that, we may not be doing a very good job about getting that information out to the public, to let the public know what it is the department does. So I think that's a really great point to share that information. And then it also plays into accountability. So you know what the accountability piece is as well. So I want to, before we get a chance to close out, allow, each of the panelists, James Lipton's always does it at the end of his, his piece, but I think that it's very important for people to kind of know a little bit about who you are, kind of why you got into policing, maybe in a very nutshell, maybe a job you did before you became a police officer, and what is your hope for us moving forward, during this time, and we'll start with the chief. I think she can hear me. There you go.
I'm sorry, I was actually answering a question in the chat. Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, no problem. What you did before you became a police officer, and what's your hope for the future of this profession as we go forward, with our work?
All right, so before I became a police officer, man, that was over 22 years ago. So I became a police officer out of necessity. I think just a lot of people know I was a teenage mom. I started testing to be a police officer as soon as I could, because I wanted a profession in which I could provide for myself and my son and serve the community. I am a person of service and I wanted to provide service. But before that, I actually worked at the district attorney's office in the child support office. So I was working to collect child support for young people. My hope is that we can all as a community and the police department get on the same page about where we want to be, the city of Richmond. I know that there's a lot of talks in other different cities and, again, the discussion on defunding, but I think every city has unique needs. And I think we should focus our needs on what's happening in our city. I think that we as a police department do an above and beyond job. We do an exceptional job. And I know that we make mistakes. And I know that, we have to acknowledge that and make sure that our community feels heard. But I think that we need to continue to have those difficult conversations and figure out where we, the city of Richmond, police department and community, want to move forward and how we're going to move forward. And we need to do that together.
Thank you, Chief. Captain Simmons.
Yeah, so I got into law enforcement for real personal reasons. I grew up in a household with domestic violence, and because of intervention of the local police department and the feeling of rescue that I felt, the feeling of watching kind of my family be able to not necessarily be living in fear because of the assistance and the aid and the bridge and the partnership we had with the local police department, I was inspired as a young boy, and I wanted to always be able to do that for somebody. That it was always in my mind to be somebody's, quote unquote hero in their worst time and their worst issue when life is dealt them some rotten lemons, to be able to do something to help people in those moments. That's really what the genesis of my desire to be in law enforcement was. My path to get there also went through various jobs of service. I've worked for churches, working with youth and teenagers for a lot of years. And then I had a very young family and needed to provide for my family. So I took a job in medicine, and I got involved with working in pharmacy, but never wasn't satisfied because that wasn't what my passion was. And so decided to leave that and started my journey into law enforcement at that point. And best decision I've ever made in my life. To move forward, I am a firm believer that it is not us, it is not them, it is we. And I think that having the approach that we move forward together, it's not what do the police need to do solely to change, not what does the community need to do solely to change, but those are interchangeable concepts, and it's what do we need to do together in order to move forward. And I hold firm to that definition of community, that it is a group of like-minded people. And it is a process of refining. And as law enforcement, understanding what the mind is, what the need is of the community, and as community, understanding what are the capabilities and what are the resources within their police department, and becoming like-minded through that process. And the bedrock of all that is relationship. So building relationship, becoming like-minded, and we together moving forward. In my mind, is going to be the solution, and it's going to be the future of our PD in Richmond.
Thank you, Captain. Sergeant Oliver.
Okay, let's see. So I before law enforcement, I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years, and since then I've been a deputy sheriff or a police officer. So my life has been service. Like, that's all I've ever done. As far as the department goes, I think we've been going in the right direction, and it's good for the community to question us and for us to have conversations, because it's always a better way to do things. And you just, with more information, you come to a better solution for a problem. So like I said, I just think we're going in the right direction. We have a lot of good young officers that got into this profession for the right reasons. And I'm just looking forward to the future.
Thank you. Officer President.
Howdy. Just like Captain Simmons, I too grew up in a household of domestic violence. And I literally say I give homage to the officer that gave my mother wisdom to leave out of that situation, because I would not be here on this forum talking to you guys. And so that mustard seed was planted in me. And so you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains, right? And so all of my life growing up, I've always got into service. I knew that I wanted to do something that gave back, experiencing living in shelters, homelessness. I knew that I wanted to do something so I can be a voice of reason, a voice of hope for someone. And that was in a similar situation. And so I eventually God opened a door where I could get into policing. And so I went through the police academy, and Lord and behold, I'm here at Richmond PD serving this fine community. And well, before that, I was a music teacher. I taught guitar in a youth center in East Oakland. And but yeah, now I'm here with Richmond PD, and I hope to retire at an old age, hopefully in a higher rank. And just like as everyone on this panel, I have a voice as far as the future of the department, especially myself being so new, and I plan on being here for my career. I definitely want to see the cohesiveness of the community, because we are strength in numbers, and just to continue to build on that relationship and transparency on both ends. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what the future holds, and that God covers us. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you, and thank you to everyone who joined and took time out on your afternoon to participate in this forum. I know that there were a lot of things in the Q&A, so if anybody wants to chime in, please do. But thank you to Mandy Swartzing, who's been awesome at trying to answer some of your questions, and also taking note of some of the information that we couldn't answer and try to get back to people, because I think it's important to make sure that we answer as many of those questions as we can. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be able to be the moderator of this particular forum. I hope that we continue to have more of these to be able to connect and also be able to move on some of the things that we talked about today: partnership, accountability and transparency, relationship, education and training. So it seems like those seem to be some of the central themes that I heard come out of today. And we look forward to working with the NAACP and other community groups on building on what we have and examining what we have in this whole climate of looking at what does it actually mean to reimagine these kinds of services, and what does it mean to continue to build those relationships with the community. So before I close out, I want to give it over to Mr. Robinson to see if you have any closing remarks, and then we'll go ahead and close the forum.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Malum, for shepherding us through this, I believe, a very successful event and opportunity. I most certainly would love to continue the conversation with the chief, and periodically as deemed necessary, or maybe just on some kind of a period, that we come back and continue to broaden the conversation and share the successes. I believe it's going to take the community to be aligned with, well, first of all, the department to be aligned with the concerns of the community, the policymakers who sets policies. We want to have our impact with that group, and also to share voices from the community, from the various sectors, so that as you make decisions and set policies, it's representative of the greater community. And for those voices that do not have platforms, we are specifically trying to provide platforms for voices that don't already have platforms, and to give opportunities to share our thoughts and concerns. So we look for a continuing working effort with the departments in the city, particularly the Department of Law Enforcement. And as we move forward, we want to not have any incident that we react to, but to be a part of the solution in terms of avoiding things that we can avoid. With that being said, then I'll thank everyone for having joined us. We look forward to the next opportunity and the next department from the city of Richmond that we will provide the opportunity for you to hear your voice.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, and thank you to the NAACP. Thank you to the panelists, all the questions. And, you know, we cannot have this conversation in the midst of a conflict. You want to have a conversation before a conflict occurs. And so I think this is a very good way to be able to do that. Thank you for everyone who joined. We look forward to continue the conversation. See you at the next one.